great to see you all and a full house. I'm still recovering from the earlier session, to be honest. Hilary was so powerful in the stories that she told. But we've got a fantastic follow-up with this panel. We've discussed a lot about the role of government in tackling these issues of social injustice and social connection. A lot about the role of civil society in tackling those self-same challenges. And this session is crucially about the role that business can play in tackling those self-same challenges. Come on in, there's still one or two free chairs dotted around. If not, come sit on the seat, sit up the front if you like, on the stage. Ian, come on down. Businesses are social animals. Always have been, always will be. And we're going to explore with two fantastic panelists just what the scope is of the social role that business might play. Two fantastic panelists. We are missing one. Shaheen Syed from Accenture was due to be here, but family illness means that she can't. But the good news from that is there's even more time to hear from Mo and from Will. I know have huge amounts of interesting things to say about just these questions. And rather than me introduce them, I thought let's let them introduce them on what role they think business most usefully plays in addressing these crucial questions. So please start by joining me in welcoming our two panelists, Mo and Will. And Mo, could I start with you? Tell me a bit about your story and the essay question for today.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm missing a Wembley Cup final for this one. You'll be giving me a lot of sympathy. And City, of course. I'm a Manchester lad, and
It's divided the audience, Mo.
So yes, but be partisan if you want. So I guess for this journey, for this talk, my story is very much similar to a lot. And on the previous keynote, we heard it. Growing up in a very lower working class, first generation family, the reality for many of us, including myself in the 80s, was there was no sort of fairness in the system. And you either got lucky or you didn't. And that's the sort of, crossroads that many of us, and I got lucky in the sense that, found my way out of that system. And then managed to get to university. I don't know how, and it was quite ironic that the first time I got to Manchester from a Blackburn sort of home, which is 20 miles away, was when I was 18, and that was the reality. So one thing that I learned in those sort of formative years, and every time I get into an Uber, I have a bit of an imposter syndrome now. That there was one of my teachers actually said to me that all that you'll amount to is to be a taxi driver, and that was at 13. So it's quite sort of scarring when you hear somebody who's supposed to be empowering you and enriching you to be able to sort of pretty much consign you to a reality that you just don't know what to do with. So for me, it was always the sort of notion to say that if somebody else doesn't do it for you, you've got to do it for yourself. And I think that's the mantra with which I've built my career. And my career has very much started in the early 90s in Manchester as an entrepreneur. I started my first business in the basement of what is now called, any of you been to Manchester recently? So we're sort of trying to mimic London in gentrifying most of it. Where I started was not very much a desirable sort of place, but now it's very gentrified and you can't get a coffee for less than 10 quid. So that's where I started my first business in the early 90s in the basement of this one sort of disused warehouse building. And my claim to fame was I was next door to the guy who started Boohoo, so I was in good company. But I built my business, and throughout my sort of business career, I've been lucky enough. I've failed many times and built many times over to have then created businesses of value in tech And my last business was the largest 3D printing business in the country, which I then exited. It was at that time that in the sort of early 2010, 2013 time, that when I looked upon my workforce, which was a very, very highly skilled workforce of nearly 500, majority of them either coming from Eastern Europe or from elsewhere in the world, or from, quite sort of, advanced education. There wasn't many people who actually looked like me and actually came from the places that I came from. And the way technology was moving and the way I was sort of moving with it was that there was a real sort of heating up of the market, and the talent pool was just shrinking considerably, and it is now. And I thought to myself, I said, there's a problem here that could be fixed from a business problem point of view, that companies are really struggling to find the talent to actually meet the needs and the opportunity of technology. But most of the people are coming from a very stratified, narrow sort of pool, and you're paying extortionate amounts. A developer was commanding £150,000 a year, whereas previously you'd pay 30, 40 grand. So that was the sort of blueprint upon which I started probably my last business now, but very much with a mission of doing two things together: to have a commercially successful business, but actually make a social impact. And the mission was fair access to technology futures, because the problem I looked at was there are many places with amazing talent, but because they've been underinvested, that talent never sees the light of the opportunity, or don't have the confidence or the belief to find it. And as such, that's what I started in sort of 2018, 2019. The pandemic actually helped me in the sense that it really put a spotlight on the reality of what technology could actually do. And since then, I've put 3,000 people from those disadvantaged companies into tech jobs. I've put around 300 mums who are economically inactive at stay-at-home, who are now in data and AI roles. And I've probably supported now, and we have a super curriculum across schools where we take the lost talent, because there's so many young people in schools where their talent never gets anywhere near the support that they should get. And we heard from the keynote before, because they come from disadvantaged communities and the system doesn't cater for them. So we've created a super curriculum which brings a different pedagogical approach to their learning through technology, gaming, and giving them that sort of belonging that then means they are motivated to achieve the 8s and 9s at GCSE, which means that they can get to the sort of highest destinations that their talent deserves. And we're currently doing that across probably now 20,000 young people across the North and the Midlands, working with GCHQ and DSIT and government departments. And in a parallel universe, I am one of the founders of Star Academies, and we established one school in the late 90s as a free school, and now we've got 40 schools across the UK with 40,000 young people. We've just brought Eton to the north to give opportunities to those disadvantaged kids that Etonians have had for many a century, to young people from Oldham and Teesside and Dudley in the first instance, and bringing that investment in. So essentially, my mission very much was that you can run a successful business and scale it, but at the same time make a real impact in the communities and the societies that really do need that opportunity. And technology is such a great enabler to make that happen. And if you can give visibility to the opportunity, people will go and take it.
Well, it's a wonderful story. Round of applause for that. And I turn to one in a second, but just picking up one thread of what you said there, Mo. How much of this is down to the personality, the force of nature that is a leader like you?
Yeah, I think I learned very quickly. I mean, I learned to use and leverage the disadvantage to your advantage. I learned in the early 90s when I sort of started my business. I was fortunate in a way that I was a Asian heritage entrepreneur with a gobby Asian I sort of spoke. And the then leadership of Manchester actually was seeking to be sort of diversifying. And Sir Howard Bernstein, the late Sir Howard Bernstein, and Sir Richard Leese, who were the leadership that has transformed Manchester to what it is now, happened to select me for some reason. They'd heard of me to come onto their business board. And through there, I managed to then get selected to represent Great Northwest with Gordon Brown and his urban regeneration back in the 90s in his government, that they sort of saw the city centres as being, the sort of hubs of economy, and we needed to regenerate them. And I was a representative of pretty much the whole of the Asian heritage business community, which I thought, at 25 was a big burden to carry. But I learned how to navigate systems and, politics and everything else as an entrepreneur. And I managed to say that, at the end of the day, it's about being able to connect with the right people to make them understand to do the right thing. And I think it still is the case that, unfortunately, what is so common sense isn't being done. What is so obvious is not being put into place. The adage I give that too often we create potholes in those communities rather than wells. And by that, what I mean is great initiatives that come along, especially in tech. What I'll say to you, what I'm now fixing for local government, and I work with many a local authority in local government, is that they all have an ambition to be, future-proofing with technology. Everybody likes the buzzword of innovation and technology. If you speak to any political leader, they will say, we want to be the place for innovation, that our people and our young people will now flourish in that. So what they do is they get some grant funding, they build a glass box with great intention, and in 5 years' time it'll be tumbleweed, and they'll be struggling to pay the head lease because some developer was very keen to get a council as their tenant. And in reality, you've created a pothole. And the pothole means that people who you created hope with will now say to you, this ain't for us. And I can give many examples about Media City, where I am, where my hub is, where the BBC is, where that's happened for Salfordians over 10 years. So I think too many people create, and potholes, and when they leave, people think, oh yeah, the money ran out and we'll move on somewhere else. What you do is you scar a community, because that community then is actually being tripped over by that pothole, because it indoctrinates the fact that this wasn't for us anyway, and this shouldn't be something that we should actually hanker for. Whereas if you were the long-term investor here, you'd create a well and people would actually take from it and sustain themselves for it. People don't need charity, people just need line of sight. And I think it is that you have to show leadership, but my mission is to show it through commercial means, to say it shouldn't be charity, it shouldn't be altruistic. You can create, my business is now, from when I started, I'll be very honest, we've scaled to 20 million in revenue with significant profit, but at the same time I've delivered 44 million pounds in social impact in 2 years. It is doable if everybody understands that you don't have to just think charitable or CSR or EDI. Don't give it labels, just do the right thing.
Fantastic. A murmur of content there. In the and that discussion of wells and potholes actually is a brilliant bridge to Will, Chief Executive of the Fairness Foundation, working on just those questions. Will, give you the floor to say some more about your work. Amazing work.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here, and fantastic to hear Mo's really inspiring story too. So I'm here under false pretenses, and I don't work in the private sector. In fact, I spent 5 years working in government in the mid-2000s, had quite enough of that, and have since worked largely in the non-profit sector. And about 4 years ago was talking to the businessman Julian Richer, who is the founder and MD of Richer Sounds, as anyone who bought a hi-fi system in the mid-90s, or a telly more recently will possibly know, about setting up a think tank to promote fairness in the UK, which is obviously a fairly broad ambition. And Julian, having initially been quite successful and jetted around in private jets for a few years, had a sort of Damascene conversion early on, as he will freely admit and has written about, and realised that a really simple model for commercial success is to treat your staff, your customers and your suppliers well. And doing all three of those things will often lead to demonstrable commercial reward. And Richer Sounds has very much thrived in large part due to that approach. And in fact, Julian funds a responsible business kite marking scheme called the Good Business Charter, which is all about responsible business practices in terms of how you treat your employees and your suppliers and paying your tax on time and all those sorts of things. But the Fairness Foundation, which I run and which Julian kindly funds, is focused less on responsible business and more on fairness as a vision for a society as a whole in the UK. And we took the the sort of slightly cheeky step of trying to define fairness when we launched it 3.5 years ago, and we've come up with a definition which we call the fair necessities, which is all about 5 things. Fair essentials, that everyone has the basic needs they need to partake in society. Fair opportunities, that everyone has genuinely fair opportunities to maximise their potential. Fair exchange, which means that you contribute to society through tax where you can, and you're supported by it in return. Fair rewards, so that we reward people for their social and economic contribution to society. And then fair treatment, that people are treated equally, but also that have equal dignity, voice and respect in our society. And what I came to the realisation of was that you can't really achieve fairness in the UK without quite dramatically reducing inequality from its current levels, especially socioeconomic inequality. So our game really is to persuade UK politicians that we need to reduce socioeconomic inequality for moral reasons and also for political reasons in terms of what voters want, but also because of its damaging impact on our economy, our society, our democracy and our environment. I'm now going to talk about the actual question of the session. So in terms of the role of business here, so as I say, we focused less on the sort of responsible business agenda, but I did want to talk about 3 quick issues and can talk more about those in detail if anyone would like to hear it. One is around the need for wealth to be shared more broadly across society at the outset, if you like. What some horrible policy wonks call pre-distribution as opposed to redistribution. So rather than allowing the free market to do its thing and then moving things around through taxes, or rather in addition to doing that, because taxes are important. I used to work for the Tax Justice Network, so I should say that. It's important as well to share wealth more broadly at source. And of course, the private sector has a big role in this in terms of pay, and in particular in terms of what I would describe as economic democracy. And I think there is a real opportunity for businesses and investors and government and civil society and everyone else to be much more focused on some of these questions around economic democracy, which obviously includes trade unions, includes shared ownership, employee ownership models. It includes worker representation on boards. And there's a whole set of things that I think we are crying out for. And given that, Mo was talking about in passing about DEI and CSR and ESG, all these things that are under attack, it seems, from left and right at the same time, that actually if we can take a quite hard-nosed approach to some of those very tangible things that businesses can do differently, that investors can do differently, and that also the government clearly needs to do different things around in terms of incentivising and regulating and so on, that is a real opportunity to mend some of the social and political divides that are emerging at the moment. Secondly, it feels to me that we're crying out for a return to some Ed Milibandism, which is not called often here, but when Ed Miliband in 2011 talked about predators versus producers, and no one really paid much attention, I think he was actually onto something, that we hear lots about wealth creation in today's politics, and I think there is an opportunity to talk more about wealth creation, but also about wealth extraction, and to look at examples where wealth is being extracted, or if you like, redistributed upwards, as well as being genuinely created, and to think about how do we redesign our economy to increase the amount of creation and reduce, or at least tax out of existence, the amount of extraction. And thirdly, I think that the private sector has a real opportunity to lobby more for government to reduce inequality, in addition to doing what it can itself to try and either reduce inequality or to try and compensate for it in some way. And I think a lot of the difficulties that businesses, as well as other actors in society, have is that they're trying to compensate for very extreme levels of inequality, which is bloody difficult. It leaves them vulnerable often to accusations of progressive discrimination and all these sorts of things. I've forgotten the term, but you know what I mean. And it's hard to do when the baseline levels of inequality and therefore the inequalities of opportunity are so very high. And I think that businesses could be doing much more to make the public case, the business case, the economic case, the social case, for government to do more in order to deliver a fairer society where you've got consumers who can afford to buy more products and services, your social and public infrastructure is in a better state, etc., etc. There's a clear case for businesses, and I think we could see usefully much more of a strong business voice on those sorts of arguments.
Fantastic. Will, thank you. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, which I'll then pass to Mo as well, actually, because I'd love to hear his perspective. You mentioned there business as a force for good, some, business as a force for less good. 'Twas ever thus. What's true of business is true of individuals as well. But when it comes to business, what might we do to provide more giddy up to the good and to provide more restraint to the bad, to rebalance what is necessarily a mixed pool of business as it is a mixed pool of society?
Yeah, I mean, the levers are many, right? So there is clearly the opportunity to use a tax system to disincentivize certain types of activity and to incentivize others. And we've seen, there's lots of pushback when the Chancellor tried to remove the carried interest loophole on private equity, for example. Now, I'm not suggesting that private equity is de facto a bad thing, but there are clearly ways in which we can either reduce incentives for certain types of activity or increase incentives for others. The regulatory system, I think, we have a political climate that's heavily focused on deregulation at the moment. Clearly, you can't say that all regulation is good or all regulation is bad. We need a smarter conversation about appropriate regulation, but I believe that there are ways in which we can regulate that will be to the advantage of responsible businesses in terms of stopping a race to the bottom. You don't want to put businesses in a situation where by doing the right thing, they are placing themselves as a competitive disadvantage. And so there's clearly an opportunity for the government to think about that as part of its broader push for the growth mission, which in my mind is very closely tied to the opportunity mission. You can't achieve the growth mission without also making significant progress on the opportunity mission.
And you touched there, before I pass to Mo, on different models of corporate governance. You mentioned employee ownership, social entrepreneurship. What role could that play, should that play, actually, in achieving this better balance between the two?
I think it has an important role to play. I don't want to go into detail because it's not my area of expertise, to be frank. But I think one thing that strikes me is that in talking about the role of, if you want to call it the social enterprise sector, or call it what you want, that sometimes we can lose sight of this distinction between businesses that deliver social and economic value, regardless of their ownership structure, and businesses that are actually more about extracting value, social and economic, from society. And that in a way, so the social enterprise sector, or whatever you want to call it, has to be a key part of the solution. And the more that we can encourage those sorts of business models like employee ownership, the better. But I think we can lose sight of the fact that there are an awful lot of businesses that are structured in a much more straightforward way that are delivering lots of value. And at the same time, there are lots of businesses that are structured in the same way that are somewhat more siphoning it up.
Mo, I'm asking the same question about that balance of good and bad business practice, but also maybe as a addendum to that. Do you think we do enough in this country generally to celebrate good business practice?
Well, two things. I think business mirrors society. I mean, there's no it's not like we're in some sort of different galaxy here. And also business. Let's not expect things from a business whose intention is profit. Sometimes I just get sort of perturbed by people's sort of views on look, a leopard doesn't change its spots. At the end of the day, if you're in it for profit, you'll make profit. You do whatever you want. I mean, you have to do to make profit. That's your intention. That's your shareholders' intention, private equity's intention. Don't expect anything different. I think sometimes we're disappointed because we expect more from people who've said, well, I'm not in it for that. I want a nice car and a nice house and a yacht in wherever, and you know what? That's me. So the reality is the reality. I think sometimes we just have expectations where we shouldn't have expectations. I think fundamentally we don't have an entrepreneurial culture as much as we should have here. 100%. I've been, I've got now businesses across elsewhere in the world, in the Middle East and elsewhere. I think other places do entrepreneurship much more better in a way to really encourage. I mean, which kid in the school will understand that there's a career pathway to be a business owner or a business leader? And sometimes we misinterpret what a business leader is. Many of these business leaders who get invited to number 10 have never put their houses on the line. They've been corporate leaders who now run businesses. In reality, that's a very different wealth creation to the wealth creator who basically risks everything and lives every day on a tightrope, on that basis that, I'm doing something that is going to be worthwhile, which will create opportunity and wealth and give me the sort of, return and passion. I think we just don't do enough of that. And I think one of the things I've seen, look, one of my divisions works with female entrepreneurs, and we've now put maybe 500-600 women into freelance and in creative businesses. That's a different energy and a different culture. And I started that in the pandemic because many of the women, predominantly women working in retail and hospitality, were being made redundant even when there was furlough available. And I looked at it and thought, there's a business opportunity here. So I sort of created something which said that, and Andy's been to my hub at Media City, I just gave them a year's free rent. And I said, just bring your business. I'll take a stake in your business. And if it grows, it grows. If it doesn't, then it doesn't matter. And you know what? There's some of these women are now employing 100 people. And these women have a very different culture and a very different attitude to how business should be done. And there's a generation that is growing up, and I nurture, early startup entrepreneurs in technology, and I look at the DNA and I look at their sort of outlook in life and outlook about what they want to do. And some of them are now really generating serious revenues. The investment they will get is with investment that they know that they can make a difference in their employee base, in the way they have a culture, in the way they actually do things, which will be very different to what I knew in the 90s when I was aspiring to be an entrepreneur, and the role models I had were pretty crap, to be honest with you. And it's not the way to do business. Go on a golf course and try and just be as rude to women as you want, and and all of that. And I thought that was the way you did business. So I think there's an education piece here. And if we want to change the system, change the way we nurture the next generation of entrepreneurs and actually encourage people to feel like they can be. One of our problems is that if somebody, I've got now women who are nurses who are now running businesses, but they would tell me to say, well, if, at 28, 30, I would have never thought that I'd be an entrepreneur. And if I go to these tech hubs, there's these 20-something-year-olds in white pumps and Red Bull, and I don't belong to that. So if you create an environment where people can actually, feel belonging, then you're going to get some serious entrepreneurial talent. Because what is entrepreneurship? You look at a problem and you think you can fix it. You've got a hole in the ground and I can fill it. And in reality, there's many, many holes in the ground that need filling. So the reality is there's real opportunity and there's creativity. One of the other things I do in the creative industries is there's people in media and animation and TV who are now being made redundant because technology is taking over. So what I did was I've just created a division which now upskills time-served creatives to then become freelancers, and I place those freelancers into the market again. Now they've had an opportunity to continue their career, and I'm making some serious money about freelancing them into actual projects. So reality is there's all sorts of ways to actually nurture, but I think established businesses that have been founded with a particular intent, don't expect too much from them. It's the intention that matters. What was your intention to set that business up? And if it's pure profit, then don't expect them to do anything different. They might put a veneer of acceptability to it, but the reality is the shareholder. I've been in those boardrooms when I've sold businesses with private equity, and honest to God, I wouldn't want to be in those boardrooms because they are not interested in my sort of philosophy or culture. What they're saying to me is, can we now double the EBITDA? And we're not really bothered how you do it, but can you double the EBITDA? That's not the right philosophy if we're going to have businesses that are going to do truly good things for their employees.
Well, on this question of entrepreneurship and whether we're doing enough to inculcate the right culture of entrepreneurship, I saw you nodding when Mo was first talking about that. One, do you agree on his diagnosis there's not enough of that as there should be? And two, why is that? And what can we do differently, perhaps, to nurture more of the right sort of business, which Mo exemplifies?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Mo has said on that. I think where I come at it from is thinking about the underlying barriers, if you like, across society and the economy. So what is it that's holding some people back from thinking about entrepreneurial careers? In particular, if you don't have family resources behind you, you don't have, you've got to really stick your neck out to take a risk. Yeah. And so there's a real inequality of opportunity for risk taking. And I think, there are ways in which businesses, there are funders, the education sector can try to compensate for some of those inequalities. But fundamentally, those inequalities of opportunity are becoming so vast that the only way to bridge them in a sustainable and sort of effective way is to remove or at least reduce some of those underlying inequalities, especially of wealth. And we looked at the level of wealth inequality and its impacts last year in a report called the Wealth Gap Risk Register. And we looked at ONS data, and the relative level of wealth inequality in this country has remained broadly stable, albeit absurdly high, for quite a few years now. But the absolute gap between the top 10% and the bottom 10%, or actually the top 10 and the middle, has gone up by 50% in the decade between 2011 and 2019. And that is creating a society in which a reasonably large proportion are growing up with the financial security that enables them to think about these things and take risks, and the other half of society, at least, finds it harder. And of course, that's not to say that some people can't do it, but you have to be incredibly brave, bright, hardworking, etc. And why should the barriers to success be so much higher for such a large proportion? And this has negative effects on social cohesion, on connection, on our democracy. It's driving people towards authoritarian populists. It's bad for economic growth because it wastes people's talent, and it's a barrier to opportunity.
I see lots of nods in the room. I'm going to go to the audience now for some questions. Wait for the mic. While you're doing that, Mo mentioned that we met previously. I had a fantastic visit to Media City, and you showed me the amazing thing you're doing. But I'm not sure you know this, Mo. I'm still emotionally scarred by that experience.
Yeah?
I'll tell you why at the end. Remember the virtual reality bit at the end?
Oh, yeah.
So I'd never worn a virtual reality headset before and was pitched in against Andy Burnham in a game. He'd obviously been practicing for years.
Yeah, he's a DJ.
Yeah. He demolished me at the game, and I've been having therapy ever since about that.
That's on YouTube, you know that, Andy.
Is it?
Yeah. You don't know your vibe.
No, Mo, that's making it worse, Mo. Let's take some questions. We'll start right at the front here. We'll work back.
Thanks. I just want to say it's been a fantastic day, and my question is basically going to incorporate everything which I've experienced today. I'm thinking to myself that for the 21st century, we need to have cooperation between businesses, government, local authorities, organizations like you, people coming together, because the solution is not with the government, because the government doesn't have money. So my question is, what can the government do to help business to buy a stake in the future, bearing in mind that governments change colors and economic policy falls to bit every 4 years?
Hold those thoughts. Just behind you. So we'll collect.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about what this concept of social capitalism might be, and particularly like issues like what might social enterprise play, and particularly maybe more place-based social enterprise. What I'm hearing here is the social impact is high, but I mean, thinking back to Hillary's talk around how connection matters, and a lot of the way business works is at a global level, and how we might look at sort of place-based social enterprise to see the benefit acting at local level, and how people might see that benefit, and how you might develop challenges for those businesses around that. So I'm just wondering what a place-based social capitalism might look like. Fantastic.
I'm going to take one more question here, and then we'll go back to Mo and to Will. Then we'll come over here, I promise.
Thanks, Andy. As you can probably guess, this is a session of the day for me. I run a company called Industrial Paradigm. I worked for 16 years for the TUC, And I wanted to ask, so obviously I agree with much of what Will said. I wanted to ask if we need to talk more about good work, which feels like the part of our economic policy discussion that we talk about less. So whereas Keynes believed in full employment, and by the time of Thatcherism, we had a minister who said that 3 million unemployed was a price worth paying. And it does feel that good jobs in long-term industries, in manufacturing and others, as they disappear, they are replaced by insecure jobs, low-quality jobs. And that seems to be the pattern that we've got ourselves into. And that leaves trade unions, of which I'm a great supporter, ending up defending jobs in fossil fuel industries or the jobs that are likely to be lost to AI, because they know their members will get such worse jobs when those jobs disappear. So do we need, as a society and as a politics, to be talking more about good work?
Very good. Will, I might start with you on that.
Yeah, I can talk to that one and to the first one, probably less to the second one. That's all right. Right. I wasn't here earlier on, so sorry about that.
Absolutely.
Agree on the good work point. You'll be unsurprised to hear. I mean, it feels odd to me that the Labour government is not doing a better job of selling the Employment Rights Bill and what it's doing, given that we know it's, incredibly popular and there's all sorts of polling that covers, Reform voters as much as Labour voters or anyone else who are, very much in favour of the, in many ways, relatively radical provisions in that legislation, including cracking down, although not entirely, on zero-hours contracts, for example. So, yeah, I think absolutely. And it feels like a conversation that, is going to become increasingly important, of course, as more and more jobs are at least changed and possibly in some cases removed through AI, etc. So, absolutely. On the sort of stake in the future and this thing about 5-year cycles, yeah, I think, you mentioned about government having no money, and if, there's a conversation about whether the fiscal rules are set in stone or not, and there's a conversation about whether government could, for example, tax wealth more. But I accept that there will be fiscal constraints either way. One of the things that occurs to me as a key barrier in terms of this 5-year cycle is that all of the disincentives to politicians to think about the long term. And we published a report a couple of weeks ago, excuse the sales pitch, which talked about the importance of embedding long-term thinking in politics and how can you actually do that, given all the barriers in place. On the 10th anniversary of the Welsh legislation for future generations, which, while by no means perfect or the silver bullet, is, I think, an important part of that process.
Man.
I'll just take the collaboration point. I think, and the place point as well. Where I work now, I only work on a place-based approach to my business operations, and I partner with local government and national government. One of the things that I saw clearly, I used to be the chair of the LEP, Andy Burnham being on the board, and the way that now devolution is working, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity with great leadership within that sort of devolution, is a multifaceted, multi-agency approach to a region and a place. And why I mean that, I back in the day, saw too much of this siloed working from sort of Whitehall, where each department will be bringing initiatives. And obviously when you come up north to the unwashed, you need to do good stuff for them because they don't have any other way to do anything. So basically different departments will rock up trying to do the same thing. And I'm looking at it and thinking, here's DSIT trying to do the same thing that DFE is trying to do and the communities housing are going to do, but then you're not speaking to each other and you're wasting money with different people trying to fix the same problem. Why don't you just all sort of, sit together and say, look, I've got 10 million, you've got 10 million, you've got 10 million, 30 million, bring business in, get another 30 million, and you're going to have a bang for your buck in the real place. So essentially, I think devolution is now creating this opportunity, business at the front. I'm now the chair of the Lancashire Business Board, and we're going through devolution. Unfortunately, we had sort of local government elections, and we had a bit of a problem there. But we've got to fix that problem. Some of you who might know the sort of situation, but we've got to fix the problem because what we're talking about here, devolution, creates real opportunity to, one, create a very collaborative multi-agency approach properly, understand the place issue, and bring all of the sectoral people, voluntary, charity, health, and everybody together and say, if we're looking at Burnley or Blackburn, we've got to look at it from a holistic lens and look at the long term. And if you do it that way, education, business, health, society starts all to be empowered, multi-agency investment. And you know what? The business case is just profound, because if you can unlock the prosperity of a region, inward investment, local government pension funds should be then round the table. Look, Manchester skyline, if any of you go for a weekend, now you'll stay in the Beetham Tower. The Beetham Tower has now another 10 towers. Do you know who funded that? The local government pension scheme. The pension scheme should be brought around the table and said, in these towns, you're going to invest. And this investment is going to go over 30 years. Patient capital with proper leadership, proper devolution, proper ownership. And if you got, Andy's now got £1 billion a year to bring into Greater Manchester. That is an opportunity to now really do this properly. And I believe in devolution. But I chair the business board because we need to be then saying, from an economic point of view, where is the AI frontier for West Lancashire or for Oldham? Yeah. How do we turn that opportunity into real jobs, into high-paid opportunities like our predecessors did in advanced manufacturing, in rail and transport, in steel and infrastructure, to the new frontier, which will pay triple the sort of person for that employment. And not only that, those people will continue to reinvest rather than take it and go somewhere else.
Fantastic. I'm going to take 3 questions now from the left wing of the room in the interest of political balance. And we'll start up there at the back and then we'll go across. Thanks.
Great talk, thank you very much. I wanted to ask, you said that this country needs to be more entrepreneurial. I wondered whether you think that our cultural approach to business failure is a barrier. We very much regard business failure as very stigmatised in this country compared to other countries where sometimes it's just a rite of passage.
Fantastic. You're going to keep that mic just passing to your left.
Hi. I run a digital agency, so we've got a team of 9 staff and what have you, and it's taken me 9 years to get to a point of unpicking myself from the centre of the business to now be able to think about further opportunities and stuff. And in business, tend to work in that 9-10 year cycles, and there's this kind of cusp within business that it's really hard to get over 10 staff and keep it there. It's like there's an imaginary line. And you talked about like mentorship and stuff, and it resonated with me hard, because what we need is like a cascading system of like people with bigger businesses handing down to people who are like the next rung down, helping them scale their businesses through the right ideas and scale up. So like a mentorship kind of thing. I started my agency back in 2009. I had young children at the time. I was freelancing. It was at the back end of Business Link. And so Business Link stuff gave me the gateway into scaling my business, because it gave me networking opportunities, connections, learning with other businesses, and it provided that mentorship that I'm talking about. That got disbanded. Mm-hmm. So actually I got in at the tail end of that, but it's missing massively. Everyone, when they talk about businesses, the new policies about minimum wage rates and stuff, they are massively impacting small businesses, and everyone talks about big business. So for big business, absolutely pay your employees more, and they can sustain it because they have the money to do it. But it's actually killing small businesses because they can't create jobs. And as consumers, we all love small businesses. They're the backbones of our high streets, our communities and stuff. And not enough is being done by local authorities and by government to recognise the role of small business within society. And I'd like to kind of like throw that out there of how can we all work together to benefit small businesses and take those kind of freelancers and kind of the idea that you're talking about there and create more businesses in the future. Like the idea of are bigger businesses better?
There you go, there's a big question. We'll finish here and then we'll take it back to Mo and to Will.
I think with looking at a shift to social capitalism, I think it's important to look at that corporate diversity point. What does the business landscape look like? I think I throw into the mix cooperatives and mutuals as non-extractive businesses that aren't, they're operating in the private sector. Given the government wants to double the size of that sector, so the challenge is what does it look like in the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem? because Business Link never advised about co-ops and mutuals and barely advised about social enterprises. And what does that broader landscape look like to give that range of diversity in the business community to help with that shift to social capitalism?
What 3 fantastic questions. You have minus 30 seconds each on
Can't
those.
do justice to those questions, but very quickly. We drum out from young people the confidence to fail, because everything has to be right. The exam has to be right, the lessons have to be right, the behavior's got to be right, everything. Failure is an integral part to success, and failure is the best teacher. Success is a very poor teacher. I always say to all my entrepreneurs and everybody that I speak to, I failed in, last count, 6 businesses, some catastrophically. I learned more there than I've learned in any of my scaling businesses that have done well. Failure is an integral part, and that's why we don't have an entrepreneurial career. Entrepreneurship by default is risk. Be prepared to risk, be prepared to fail, but fail fast and move forward. Our problem is twofold. One, we don't have that sort of very confident conversation about failure, but the failure can be terminal. It shouldn't be terminal. There should be a safety net that catches that person and supports them to get back on their feet and move forward. And the lady's question about micro businesses and the scaling business, fundamental problem in local communities. The absolute bedrock of an economy are those businesses, and we just don't do enough for it. And that is potholes. Because what happens is a bit of money gets siphoned through community and housing on business support, and there'll be an absolutely crap provider who don't know the first thing about business, civil servants basically trying to sort of educate business people about how to do business with some absolutely pants consultancy. The reality is it should be business to business. People who are actually, in every local community, there are brilliant entrepreneurs who've done well. My Freelancer 100 program is actually run by women who've actually succeeded at the boardroom and all of that. So 100% with that. What was the last question? Sorry, was there another question?
We'll pick that up.
All
in
right,
the
you
interest
do
of time.
that. Sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
hogging
Will.
the panel.
I mean, the final question on, I don't know enough, to be honest, to give you a very good answer, other than to assume that there is not enough being done to promote awareness of the possibilities and benefits of non-traditional business models at the local level, and that would be a good thing. But I can't really give you any sense of whether that's a gap that needs to be filled, and if so, how. On the point about capacity to fail, completely agree with Mo, and I'll just go back to my previous point that we need to provide people with the financial security and, I think, assets. Let's go back to things about child trust funds. Let's think about citizens' inheritances and funding those through inheritance tax, for example, that give people the resources that they can use if they want to have the financial cushion to try and set up a business and not be ruined by failing early on.
We're done. How good was that? How good were they? Please join me in thanking Mo and Will.